Ready to go. So, welcome everybody to Corporate and Strategic on the 13th. We've got a couple of hours to get through. Reader, Hawke's Bay Tourism, HBRIC, some interesting updates. But first, could I ask Councillor Williams, if you wouldn't mind, to lead us in the karakia?
Thank you for the heads up and the warning there.
It's all right. I know you are very, very fluent.
Should we try the new one?
Okay, hold on, we need to find it. Here it is.
Right, you all know how it works. Ino e tātou, tu tawa mai I runga, tu tawa mai I raro, tu tawa mai I roto, tu tawa mai I waho. Kia tau mai, te mautu, te mauri ora, I te katoa, haumi e, ui e, tai e.
Kia ora. Kia ora. Thank you very much for that. So, just move on to housekeeping. We've got a bunch of rules. This is open session, public session, and is being recorded, live streamed. In an earthquake, drop, cover and hold. Shaking's long and strong, get gone. Then leave the building and follow everyone else up to Tiffin Park. The alarm goes off, and it quite often does when I'm chairing. We immediately evacuate the building and head out onto the grass. The emergency exits are clearly signposted. Toilets, wharepaku, behind Jock, and keep going. Thank you very much. Do we have any apologies?
We expect, yeah, so.
Possibly Charles.
Possibly
Charles.
Charles
Yep.
Lambert.
Yes,
And
here's an apology.
We're expecting Laura Keeley, but she's not here yet.
Yep. Okay, so we'll take Charles and Laura.
Jerry. Jerry as well.
Sheriff. We have Peter online. Welcome, Peter. Wonder if he can hear us. Anyway, we'll carry on. So could I have a mover for those apologies, please? Okay, take Jock and a seconder, Hinawai. All those in favour?
Aye.
Carried. Thank you very much. Do we have any conflict of interest declarations? There are none. Thank you. We can move on to confirmation of minutes from the 24th of August. Do I have any alterations? Any concerns to raise? If not, I'll take a mover and a seconder, please. Thank you, Jock. And to move, Sophie to second. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Right, so we have the allowance of a public forum, but I don't see any public other than invited guests, so no public forum today. Not at least in this committee. We had our, more or less our first this morning. In a
it was
while.
good.
It was good. Hopefully more and more people will learn about their right to come and talk to us. So we can move on to information and performance monitoring. What we'll do, we are waiting for READER, Regional Economic Development Agency, to turn up. So in the meantime, we already have the two gentlemen from the Hawke's Bay Tourism. So maybe if I can welcome both Hamish Saxon and George Hickton to join us around the table, and we can proceed. So I don't think there's any need for staff to give an introduction. I think you gentlemen are both well known to each other, so the floor is yours.
Kia ora tātou, nei rata mihi, ina rangatira, kua hu mai nei, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thanks very much for the opportunity of talking to you all again today. We're here essentially to produce or present the annual report from last year, which you've all been given, and we'll sort of take questions on that. I just thought it might be appropriate to start the proceedings by acknowledging the year we've been through together. Obviously, there's been quite challenging, both for the council, but also for Hawke's Bay Tourism. Faced with the funding situation that we've been given, I think it's appropriate just to explain where we've got to and some of the actions we're taking and how we might see the future. Undoubtedly, our main aim is to preserve this region's profile and reputation outside of the region. In other words, preserve the brand of Hawke's Bay, and we are the agency that represents that for this region entirely. So 3 things are going on in our world at the moment. The first one is we've spent time with our own industry, and there's an agreement from the tourism industry to basically double the funding that they're putting into Hawke's Bay tourism. It was an issue that was raised here a number of times. We've gone to the industry and said that this is an issue that we collectively need to address, and they have agreed to address that. So that's encouraging, and also I think indicates the degree of support that exists within the region's industry for what's been happening. The second thing is, in discussions with government, and we've had the Minister of Tourism here, looking at what might be long-term solutions for the funding of regional organisations like ours, because we're not alone in this. This is happening throughout the country, and it's been a constant, really, about, should the industry fund it or should local bodies fund it? Everywhere you go, local bodies fund it, but we end up in the same discussion. And could there be a solution that solves this for us all? That solution has settled, actually, finally, into the area that a form of visitor levy is understood generally to be the solution that most people will accept. Our industry here has accepted it, and most of the tourism industry throughout the country has as well. So it's definitely been accepted by government that it's on their agenda. We don't expect that to occur within the current term of this government. However, it's indicated that it may well be part of their next term, where they're in government. So the good news of that is that it's finally a selected solution that we can all agree on, and the more difficulty will be the timing. But anyway, that's where it sits. And a lot of work's going on at the moment about how that might be applied. It's certainly done elsewhere around the world, as we've all seen, and we're keen to get on with that as soon as we can. That certainly solves the funding problem that we've had for many years. The third part of that is that we're obviously in discussions with all councils about how we might bridge the gap from where we are today to where we get some other form of support. And we're essentially putting forward a minimum funding solution. There's a certain amount of money you need to keep the lights on. If we don't do that, the region will, what I would call, simply go dark. You won't have a website, you won't have anything representing this region outside of it. And we don't want that to happen, and it would be a disaster for the region. So we're putting forward what we think is the absolute minimum funding that we could survive on in order to bridge that gap towards another solution. That involves some pretty hard cutting in our organisation, and we're already in consultation on that, and we'll take that forward. So that's where we stand. We'll be coming out to all of the mayors and chair of this council as well, just indicating where we think that might sit. We've been asked to do that, by the way, by a collection of councils to say, all right, what do you think you can survive on at the bare minimum? And we're coming up with that. We're going to, we're approaching that with a positive mind frame. We understand that there is a severe funding constraint on everybody, but we're also approaching it with the need to keep the region's profile positive in moving forward. And we think we can do that for a period of time, not forever, but we're certainly going to try. So that's where we stand at the moment, and that plan has been worked on, and we'll be discussing that with everybody. Obviously, we need some form of certainty before July next year, because that's when everything runs out from us. So just with those few opening remarks and a bit of a status update, I'll throw it open for questions. Sorry, do you want to add anything to that?
I'll go around the table in a minute, but just what I would like to ask, just a point of clarification, the timing of that, your financial requirements, when this council's right in the middle of going through annual plan numbers now, when will we see, are you intending to come and ask us for money? And if so, when?
Yep.
Please.
Within the next week.
Thank you. All right, questions around the table? Joel?
On the subject of government funding, it's good to, or government relaxing its rules so you can get funding from alternative sources such as a visitor levy. That's great news. Do you think they understand that the extent to which funding of tourism contributes to rates? By that I mean, in our case, I think it's 1% of our rate take is tourism funding. And so on a nation, and that's probably a higher proportion than normal, but on a nationwide basis, I'll pluck a figure out of the air and say it's between 5 and 1% for most councils. And so that's that. And on the other hand, the government's telling us, you know, our rate increases are not sustainable. So there's a paradox between those two things. And a very simple solution is one such as you've described. And unsure as to why there appears to be a lack of urgency on their part to give effect to it.
I think the challenge is it's introducing another tax, and that's not entirely something that's agreed to by coalition partners.
Okay, so it's not. It's a shift, isn't it? It's not a new. It's an additional tax, but the money that's taken is the same.
Yeah. Some will perceive it as an additional tax, and on a promise of no extra taxation, it's a problem.
I see. Okay.
But it's, as I say, it's a solution that just about every jurisdiction around the world has adopted.
Yeah.
Because they've all experienced exactly the same problem. And a good example is Visit Scotland's just introduced it, allowed local bodies to set the rate themselves, and most importantly, allowed local bodies to determine how they would spend it.
Sorry, can I have one more question, Chair?
Sure.
The tax, is it conventionally it's a tax paid by everyone, or is it an overseas tax? So
It's paid by everyone.
Okay.
Everybody staying in commercial accommodation, it would be collected at accommodation.
There are caveats around it for special circumstances or long stays and that sort of thing, but essentially it's one tax that catches all.
Bed tax.
Yes, it's a bed tax by any other name, yeah.
Further questions? Councillor Curtin.
Yes, thanks. Good to see you guys, and thanks for your reporting. I just want to pick up on your comment in your report, and I see some pleasing result with contributions from the sector, 365,000 cash and 60K in contra. During submissions to council, we had a number of significant submissions from significant businesses, for example, port, airport, wine industry, etc. How have you got on with discussions with them, given that, you know, some of them were paying, you know, $500 for getting a free lunch, really, given the scale? How are you getting on with those discussions to put one, if not two zeros onto their current contribution?
Well, I think had there been time for those businesses to actually answer the question appropriately and correctly, you'd have found that they were actually investing significantly higher amount in our organisation through other initiatives and partnerships than simply the membership fee. The airport is one of those, and Hawke's Bay Wine Growers was another one of those. So it's really about the initiatives that we can co-develop with those. And one of the examples is the Great Wine Capitals, which has seen investors come in at different levels that we can come up that goes beyond simply a basic membership fee. So initiatives and partnerships are those discussions that we're having with those groups.
Just a follow-up question. You talked about, George, the amount of money needed to keep the lights on, and you know, you've probably got $500,000 of ongoing revenue at least from both from the sector, etc., and indications from TAs. What do you think the number will be to keep the lights on?
Well, that's the issue we're working on at the moment. We've had, the board's spent some time, but we're also in a situation where we're engaged in consultation with staff, and so it's just something we have to get through before we make that number public. Thank you. But as I said before, we hope to have that resolved within a week, so you get some sort of idea.
Councillor Sears.
Well, just some comments, Chair, perhaps when, if there's no more questions, if there's questions.
Carry on.
Probably just to, as the board rep on Hawke's Bay Tourism, just to make a few comments, probably around how hard the board's worked this year to look at new models and to come up with what it is we'll be able to do to position Hawke's Bay Tourism to deliver on maintaining the brand of Hawke's Bay amongst the problems that we're all facing with funding. It hasn't been taken lightly or for granted. That's really clear. I wanted to make that clear from a board perspective. There was a lot of suggestion through annual plans somehow that it was an expected sort of handout, but from a board's point of view, we're very clear that every piece of money, whether it's coming from the ratepayer or through the industry partners, is incredibly welcome, and we're grateful for it. I think the point I want to make, which we have talked about a little bit before, is Hawke's Bay Tourism say it, I want to say it as well, businesses that live and work and provide services in the Bay don't look after the brand of Hawke's Bay as a tourism destination, and tourism is just a product. We're competing with 30 other RTOs around the country for their dollar and for their business to travel here or anywhere else. And the brand that's been built here is something that I think should really be acknowledged. It is a fantastic brand, Food and Wide Country. Our Fork brand is superb. The Long Lunch is quite famous throughout New Zealand. The Great Wines Capital is actually it is an international brand of such reputation. It's something that we should be celebrating, something that we're absolutely not leveraging off or using. So I just want to acknowledge the work that's been done. You know, George is actually one of the industry, so he's very famous actually in the industry. For those of you who don't know, we've been very privileged to have him in the Hawke's Bay all this time to work on our brand. So whatever happens, what we shouldn't lose sight of is that we have a brand and something here that is incredibly valuable, however we decide to move forward. And we have Rita coming in next. And what I want to really put on the table is these yearly cycles of who should pay or we won't pay, or paying more or paying less, is a really immature and short-sighted way of looking at our regional economic development. We need to be much more sophisticated and intelligent in the way we are looking at the value of our economic development, including tourism, to build something that has some sort of 10-year window to give opportunity for these agencies to actually deliver something for us. So I think I've covered all of that. It's same thing I'd say to Rita, so I won't need to say it again. So I really want to acknowledge both of you and say thank you for all the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Yep.
Councillor Ormsby.
Kia ora, Chair. Thank you both for being here to report an update, and I look forward to the Mayors and Chairs discussion that you'll bring to us very soon. And sorry that this is a question. I just want to explore with you what new partnerships you've been able to build in the last, say, 6 months, the commercial partnerships, to help with your new direction forward. Just really interested.
Well, look, I mean, other than working with our industry to invest more at different levels, and others than initiatives such as Great Wine Capitals and working with other regions within our broader neighbourhood, it's actually quite difficult to develop relationships if your existence is currently to the end of a financial year. There's a degree of there's no sort of stability within a questionable longevity. So our activities in the meantime are short-term, given that we are funded only until the 30th of June. And so that's the period within which we can develop at this stage those types of partnerships with. We all the time are working with significant other agencies, with Tourism New Zealand, with travel companies, with the airlines. That's our job, and you will have seen that actually when you look at the sort of the finances and the partnerships. As you know, we've had flatline funding over the past sort of 7 financial years, but with that, we've been able to generate a return on that investment, giving us an operating income of $2 to $3 million over the last number of years per annum. So it's that type of thing. And central government certainly over the last 3 or 4 years, has been a big partner in that.
Could I just add a little to that on Partnership Hawaii? In 3 areas, really. Because of the funding challenge we are meeting, we've had discussions with both Tourism New Zealand and the Tourism Industry Association to indicate to them that we may not be able to participate in as much as we have in the past, and how might we lean on them more in future, given how little we have. And the one thing we have done and enhanced significantly is Great Wine Capital, because we're passionate to ensure that this region does not lose this international accolade and branding for the future. And it could if we don't do that. So if anything, we've doubled down on that and spent time cementing those relationships so that we've still got that tonga for the region in future. So that's what we're doing. And as Homer says, everybody else sort of looks at you and says, you're still going to be here. So
Thanks, Chair.
that's the issue. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Look, I think we've got time for one more question or comment from the screen. Welcome, Laura. Glad you can join us.
Kia ora koutou katoa, sorry for my tardiness today. Great topic. So the 3 brands that you've spoken about have grown up around my community. So it's no secret that I'm on the Bridgepath Triangle. I'm one of the tips. So given that you've been building partnerships over the past 7 years, PGSCs are probably interested in some type of tourism within the landscape in there. So it'd be more interesting to have those types of conversations with us, given that we're keen to make some investment in our community and showcase who we are. I mean, Waimarama Tours was a success, as well as Te Ara Tupua down in Central Hawke's Bay. So we've got proven record that we can help build our tourism brand here, because we're Te Mata Maui. Kia ora, just a comment, but something to think about.
Thank you, Laura. Look, if there are no further questions or comments, I think we can move on to the recommendation, which is simply receiving and noting the Hawke's Bay Tourism Update. Thank you, Councillor Sears. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ormsby. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for your contribution. We look forward to receiving your invoice, your pro forma invoice next week.
I look forward to delivering it.
Okay, so now we can regress and progress at the same time. And welcome Alistair and Lucy. Yep. Sorry, Lucy. And item 5, Regional Economic Development Agency. I don't think we take the paper as read. I don't think we need an introduction from staff. Susie's not here, so we're all yours, Alistair.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, we're here to give our 6-monthly update. It doesn't feel like 6 months since we were here last time. We're pleased that last week councils have signed off our funding agreement, which deals with the period through to 30 June 2025. Our board will be approving our annual accounts early in December and then presenting them to Matariki on the 13th of December, after which they'll be presented to councils. Shortly, Lucy will be giving an update on the findings of the research into the economy, and we'll speak to some of the other work we're doing. But before I hand over to Lucy, I do want to address the elephant in the room, which is the review of regional architecture, which is currently underway. We'll be giving our views as part of that process, but I just wanted to preface this with a little bit of background about the genesis of REDA. I've been involved in economic development for the last 25 years. I headed that in for Deloitte New Zealand. I did it internationally on behalf of New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. And when I took early retirement to come and live quietly in Hawke's Bay, I got dragged in to effectively resuscitate a failing regional economic development strategy process. I got involved, presented to a large group of business people, and got a very, very strong pushback from a pretty angry Māori gentleman who challenged me about our complete lack of engagement with the Māori economy. And he was completely right. So we went back to the office, tore up every single piece of paper that we'd written, and we started again. So it's important to understand that the Hawke's Bay Regional Economic Development Strategy was the first, and as far as I'm aware, still the only Māori and non-Māori economic development strategy in the history of New Zealand. And I'm immensely proud of that. And that led to the formation of Matariki as a kind of governance group to oversee this on behalf of business, Māori, and the local authorities and the regional council. So we're kind of really, really passionate as a board, as an entity, that the vision of the Matariki doesn't die in this review, that every household and every whānau should be able to be engaged in and benefit from a thriving Hawke's Bay economy. It's the reason I got re-involved. I had to pull out after we wrote the strategy because we were fairly busy at Napier Port, as you'll recall, with an IPO and building a wharf and a few other things. But I got frustrated at the lack of progress and got re-engaged in this process. And I am desperately keen that we continue to focus on the people who are the least advantaged in Hawke's Bay, and it is predominantly Māori. So that's a bit of a rant, excuse me for it, but it is just important in terms of context for why we believe REDA is critically important to the ongoing success of the region. So with all that, over to Lucy.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I guess just to add on to that, it's not necessarily about REDA, it's the mechanism that we most, I guess, passionately defend, whether it's us or not. The mechanism of having that shareholder grouping with iwi hapu alongside local government, alongside business, is something that is unique. It's aspirational because we have to report through to 14 shareholders. And like we talked about last time we were here, that's really difficult. And the only way to do that is to do it, we believe, through a really structured approach with one reporting line through Matariki is the way that we were set up, with a letter of expectation to which we were planning next to have a statement of intent and really clear lines of communication. So that's the thing that this region hasn't cracked before and that we want to passionately defend, whether it's us or some other people in the future. But in saying that, last time I was here, which was about June, I think, we talked about the piece of research that we were doing into the economy. So we hired Infometrics and Martin Jenkins, and you can see the Infometrics report in your board papers. They started off the piece of work looking at the last 5 years' performance of our economy. And then in the months since, and we're just finishing up now, we've been interviewing about 70, mostly businesses, but also representatives of councils and the PSGEs. And these interviews generally take between 45 minutes to sometimes a couple of hours, but they're pretty good, but they're enough to go into a bit of a deep dive. And what we've wanted to understand from a qualitative perspective is our businesses, what are they seeing as challenges of doing business here? What are the opportunities they see? And why are they here in the first place, which I've found really fascinating. We've not gone out and looked at all just the traditional sectors and the traditional players. We've been looking at the data that shows those emerging industries. And if you saw from the Infometrics report, the growth in the last 5 years has been around the technical professional services. And we've got some advanced manufacturing was probably the best label companies in Hawke's Bay that are doing some really interesting stuff. So I'll give you just a bit of an overview at a very high level at this point, because we're going to release the research after we confirm the findings in the next few weeks. So, and some of the people around the table have heard this before, but what we have found through the qualitative research and some of the quant is that the rebound from the cyclone and the flooding has been faster and more positive for many of our businesses than expected. Some industries and areas are really doing it tough. SMEs in horticulture in particular, tourism, forestry, Wairoa as an entire economy is really doing it tough at the moment, and you'll have seen that in the employment outlook as well. But it's quite a different message that we're getting from many of our businesses to the message that we're hearing from local government because of your respective interests around roading in particular. Economic conditions more generally are what are raised as being the biggest area of challenge at the moment for the majority of our businesses that we've talked to. So that's the downturn in China, the downturn in domestic demand and the cost of capital. And these are common across the whole country, so they're not unique to Hawke's Bay. What is unique to Hawke's Bay, and our researchers have been really quite complimentary about this, is that what they call, there is, and you'll know this from living in this community, but there is a really significant linked ecosystem associated with food production. So that goes from the primary suppliers through to the processors to equipment manufacturers and solution providers. And there's a really good level of tech investment across all of that value chain, really. And so companies that may have spun out of the hort sector or the primary sector are now moving on to other areas of interest around automation and robotics that aren't necessarily anymore related to the hort sector or are related to the hort sector in other parts of the world altogether and skipping the New Zealand market. So there's some quite big and impressive companies out there, and small and impressive companies doing really interesting tech. We have found, again, probably won't be a surprise for you, that family connections are the biggest driver for businesses being established here and staying here. So when very few people that we've talked to have actually talked about choosing Hawke's Bay to come to, and I might have mentioned, I think, the last time we caught up, there's quite a bit of research done about business attraction and how difficult that is, because businesses don't move for sunshine and good lifestyle. People do that. And you'll see the flood of people that have come from Auckland since COVID or from other parts of the country, and indeed from overseas. They've got their little bolt holes up the Tukituki Valley. But businesses generally collate around places where there is a good supply of labour, good access to ports, good access to international connections. So in those cases where we are lucky enough to have those businesses in Hawke's Bay, they are primarily here because of family connections. One of the business partners grew up here. They like the schooling. They say the same things over and over again. It's a safe community, nice lifestyle. So that further reinforces, I think, thinking that we have around just going out and doing general marketing campaigns to try to get businesses to come. There's very little evidence that any of those campaigns work unless they're really targeted and accompanied by very specific incentives that often our environment doesn't actually allow for. And saying that, generally positive feedback around the port, the airport, roading when it's functional, when it's not a cyclone, and a general fairly good level of connection between businesses, although all of them were saying they'd like to see more of each other and understand more of what's actually happening in the region. A lot of the businesses that we've talked to almost exist in their own bubble, and they're doing wonderful stuff, and they're exporting to other countries, and they actually don't know what's going on in the rest of the bay. So there could be some good opportunities there. The research is showing that there's a really high risk of manufacturing heading offshore, and it's already happening. We've talked to quite a few businesses that talk about a commitment to still doing R&D in Hawke's Bay as long as they can find the labour, and to finishing. But when it comes to manufacturing, they're having to manufacture overseas and then bring those products back to package them up nicely and market them and sell them. And that's because we've been told on multiple occasions, if you set up a factory in India, it costs you $8 a day for labour, and there's a line of workers walking lining up down the street, and there's a real problem with labour market availability in Hawke's Bay. Roading and skills availability are probably the most common challenges across sectors, and saying that roading is very much weather dependent, obviously, and water and energy costs, so what we call input costs, are affecting heavy users and manufacturers. Skills availability is a really interesting one. We've heard over and over again how difficult it is to get the local workforce into employment, and that there's a gap between employment and I don't even like to use these words anymore, low-skilled labour, because it's not always low-skilled in the primary sector anymore, and also, so there's a shortage of labour around there, which has eased in the last 18 months due to good old recession. In the tech advanced manufacturing, they have a challenge finding people with the right skills around automation, robotics and others. So it's interesting. General feedback for the role of local government, I would say it's almost word for word, reduce barriers, get out of the way, is the general feedback. So kind of, local government is there to take care of the regulatory environment. Business will get on with business. It's the general feedback. So in November, on November the 27th, we're going to Wairoa to do a workshop with businesses up there and some of the councillors to work through some of our findings and the recommendations. We've got quite a pile of recommendations growing. And then on the 28th, we've got a workshop in Hastings. We're trying to target about 30 to 40 businesses there. So same thing, we'll chew through what we've found, both in the quant and the qualitative research, and have a look through what does this actually mean for us, because we're not interested in just another report to chuck on the shelf, but in some actionable pieces of work that will depend on, they won't all be for reader, some of them might be for local government, some of them might be for business themselves. So, and then we'll do a final release of that report on the 13th of December and a bit of media around that. And then we'll workshop it with Matariki, or not workshop it, actually we'll present it to Matariki the next day so that they can have a bit more of a deeper dive into it. We've already, coming out of that research, there's 4 pieces of work that we know already that we'd like to take on. One that we've already kicked off, that's without even testing it in the workshops, because I've been able to go out and test it fairly widely with stakeholders. One of those that we've just signed the deal with NZIER, which is a research agency, is to look at an economic impact assessment of State Highway 2 to see if there is an economic case to be built for increasing the resilience of that road, both in terms of the opportunities that could be opened up for investment up the road, up north, and also the opportunity cost of not doing that, not only from an economic perspective, but also from a social and health wellbeing perspective. It may be a difficult case to build, so we're doing this project in 2 pieces. We're partnering with Trust Tairāwhiti, the Gisborne EDA, because that presents a more powerful case if we can open that piece of work up to look at the road all the way to Gisborne. And that's a piece of work that we would want to work alongside, obviously, the Regional Transport Committee, Wairoa District Council, business heavy users of that road. And depending on the findings of that, if we can help build a good case, we'll take that further into modelling, and then that will be a piece of good evidence that can be used for advocacy and lobbying in the future. So NZIER has a really good track record of doing these pieces of work and helping to build a case for investment for government. We're also working on a business case at the moment in collaboration with Food East to look at the Fermentation Centre of Excellence. That will be looking at whether it's commercially viable. So just getting that counter-briefed at the moment. Another project that's come out of this piece of work, but also our work more generally, and our focus is a project with Tihei Takitimu. If you're not familiar with them, they're the new Māori iwi Health Partnership Board locally. And their responsibility is to advocate for equitable health outcomes for Māori. So we're going to do a collaboration with them, another piece of work to look at what is the economic value, or you can put it cost if you want to put it the other way, of poor outcomes for Māori. So if we look at poor health outcomes for Māori, so if we look at, you can look at things like direct costs around hospitalisation, increased healthcare cost, if we don't look at preventative health interventions. We can understand the cost of that, but we can also look at it from a positive point of view and think about what we're missing out on in terms of our wider economy through those poor health outcomes that reduce employment, reduce engagement at school, and reduce actually mortality. So the mortality rates of Māori are so much higher, Lola? Higher than Pākehā. Higher? They live less. Struggling, thank you. So that's a piece of work that, again, we're briefing up at the moment. Then we have another project that's just in the birthing stage that we're really interested in doing, and because we've wanted to have this research into the economy done so that we've got a really good evidence base to make sure that anything that we do is actually sensible and evidence-based. So this one is like looking at that gap between local employers and local employees and the local labour force and what's happening there. There's been a lot of MSD programs over the years trying to get people not in employment, education and training into local employment in Hort and the primary sector. Only very few, I think only one I've found has been evaluated to really understand what worked and what hasn't. We've looked at some work in South Auckland that's been really interesting at understanding the attitude gap between employers and local workforce. And we want to work with EIT, with some businesses that are willing to have a go at seeing if we can really understand what's going on here and address, I guess, that the looming problems that we've got. Well, actually, they're already here with us around a disengaged local workforce and what that's going to mean to us in the future when we're already seeing businesses moving offshore because they can't access that labour and the labour that is not engaged suffering, terrible social outcomes. So again, we want to be really targeted around that and make sure that we're doing some really crunchy pilots and actually learning from them so that we can try to replicate that work. Anything that we're doing that now, because we are kicking pieces of work off, would be able to be picked up by a partner organisation if we're wound up over the next few months. So we're not spending any money frivolously. We're making sure that we have a good sort of, I guess, wide support. We always make sure we check in with Matariki that anything that we're doing outside of our letter of expectation. And I think that's probably enough to cover.
Thank you, Lucy. That's quite an impressive list of activity, and I'll look forward to that latest bit of research coming out. I just want to come back to Alistair, and you talked about the review of regional architecture in a very authoritative way that suggests there's possibly a terms of reference and some kind of quite formal process sitting in behind that. As councillors, I think we are broadly aware of consideration around the number of regional entities that we've got. We've got a READER, we've got an RRA, we've got the need for some kind of regional water approach in future. But we haven't actually seen the terms of reference, and we don't know what process you're actually going through. So I think it would be helpful if you were able, if you could just very briefly explain how you see the situation you're in that process at the moment. And then we'll go for questions.
Do you want to kick off and I'll...
Yeah. Well, I think it was kicked off by the Recovery Agency signalling to Matariki over the last couple of Matariki meetings that their time was coming up on the 30th of June. And some of the members saying that they'd like to understand what the future role of the Recovery Agency might be and the potential of keeping a regional coordination role and then understanding what the difference between them and us would be, and then where does Hawke's Bay Tourism fit into the picture. And so what that's led to is that Matariki approved Hastings District Council to develop a terms of reference, co-sponsored by Nigel Bickle and Doug Tate from CHB District Council, I assume signed off by the Cs, that may be a better place to speak, and then taken to Matariki. The review is going to be carried out by Gus Charteris, who works for Hastings District Council, with 2 consultants from the Recovery Agency, and at our request we've asked for independent consultants to be added. So Andrew Gibbs, who's a former Deloitte partner, has been added, and Leon Symes from Tato Tato, the co-chair of Matariki, asked for Tash Romana to be added to that review group. So the process, as far as we understand it, is that there's been a list there is a terms of reference, a list of interviewees put together. We are being interviewed tomorrow by 3 people on that team. It's a common list of questions, and we've been told that the methodology is a series of interviews followed by that team putting together some recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor McIntosh.
Thank you for that. If I look at a New Zealand context, in an OECD setting, our incomes are pretty bad, and
they're pretty bad because our productivity is pretty low in New Zealand, and although our GDP has been quite good in Hawke's Bay, our per capita productivity is pretty bad. And I'm aligning that with some of the things you mentioned evolving out of the research, such as we've got some really exciting tech stuff happening that lots of us don't know about. And so there's a thing there, isn't there? If we've got some expertise here and got low productivity here, then you know, there's an answer there. And so do you see your space being that, to sort of link those dots, or advocacy, or whatever? Because it's the productivity thing, period, has been such an issue for New Zealand for so long, and it's worse in Hawke's Bay.
That's right. Alistair will be able to add to this, but our productivity is 17% lower per worker, but that is mostly because of the strong dominance of the primary sector in our region. So productivity in the primary sector has grown really rapidly in the last few years, but we are lagging behind. Like you say, New Zealand is most definitely lagging behind. The role of Reader is the joiner of dots, the collector of data. We've been really careful to describe that in our charter. The advocate, and I guess we play an element of regional conscience too, to try and ask the region to work together collaboratively and stay the course on a long-term vision and stop chopping and changing. So it's very difficult. We have really cynical businesses out there that we talk to that throw their arms up and say, look, I was involved in Business Hawke's Bay, or I was involved in Venture Hawke's Bay, or I was Hawke's Bay Inc., all the different iterations over the years. And an EDA alone is never going to lift productivity or GDP growth. But having, I guess, an entity of some kind that is that clearinghouse, that holds a repository of knowledge, that is able to commission work on behalf of the region, can play an advocacy function when is needed. I think we've been missing that, and we need to be very careful what we ask and wish for. And again, it's how the shareholders manage that and govern it effectively, because it's all possible that only if 14 shareholders stay true to the promise and the purpose. And if that doesn't happen, then business will just keep on doing business.
Yeah.
But there are missed opportunities.
Yeah, and I mean, joining the dots absolutely is a critical part of our raison d'etre.
Already people contact us and say, I've got this piece of tech, who could I talk to? You know, at its most basic level, you connect them up with this horticulturist, that one. That's really basic, but it's having a place to be able to, you know, something like the state highway too, you would have thought that would have been done by someone over the years. And so if you look around who's able to do it, to release the funds to do it and have the time to oversee it, that seems like an area that fits exactly with our charter and our operating principles. It doesn't mean that, you know, we're one of the parties, we commission the work, we'll oversee it, make sure it's done well, then we'll assist the region, depending on what the outcomes are, to develop a kind of a communications advocacy plan about it. But it's not all through us, it's us alongside the other players.
Yeah. Yep. Okay.
Okay, so we have about 10 minutes. I've got Councillor Ormsby, then Sears, then Curtin. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair. Tēnā koroe, Alistair and Lucy. Thank you for coming back and updating us on all the progress. Alistair, you talked about a review that would essentially investigate RRA, Reader, possibly Hawke's Bay Tourism, and how that would work across the region in the economic development space. I heard your apprehension around the terms of reference and maybe the membership of that panel. So just for information, Zen, myself and Nick will be interviewed here at Hawke's Bay Regional Council. And I guess this is your opportunity, before going into that and knowing what we do know about Reader, what would your position of clear difference be if you thought that this review looked at comparing the different agencies in the region?
The thing that makes me nervous is that there will be a balancing between infrastructure and focusing on every household and every whānau being able to engage in and benefit from a thriving Hawke's Bay economy. They're not mutually exclusive, but I'm a former local authority roading engineer myself. I know how easily these things can consume you, but I would be genuinely worried for the future of Hawke's Bay if all we focused on was infrastructure, because there is an awful lot more to what we need to do to get more people actively engaged in the economy than just building bigger roads and better bridges. Does that answer your question?
It does, it gives insight, thank you.
Could I add to that too, just around the mechanism? I would whiteboard if I could, but I don't think it's appropriate in a council meeting. But I think we have to do some air pictures. If we think about how Matariki is set up, you've got your 5 local government leads, you've got iwi, hapu, and you've got business. And they're all represented around the table in this forum that meets every 6 weeks or so. How they meet and what they put on the agenda is down to the co-chairs and the group. So it's a goodwill collective of people. Now, at some point, Matariki said, we want to operationalise some of our vision. And so let's set up a reader. And the best way to future-proof this mechanism, so whether it's a reader, whatever it is, this mechanism is that all of us have skin in the game or represented here. And so when we do anything, and it seems quite laborious, but it's very, try to be very disciplined about it, we go back through Matariki, and Matariki should be flowing back into its entities. And I had a little rant about this last time I was here, I know, apologies for that, that the entities from Matariki need to be engaged, and there needs to be a two-way conversation that comes back. It's because it's impossible for us to be pulled in 14 different directions from 14 different shareholders. It just can't work. So it's aspirational. But if we have an entity that cuts out some of those partners, then you're immediately losing the strength of that unity, kotahitanga, around the table that exists currently. And yes, it's not perfect and it can be a bit messy and it's all about relationship and trust. But if there was a commitment to that in whatever form of entity that comes out of this review, that would be really important for this region, I think. And what we're hearing from some of our shareholders is that there isn't a commitment to that. And I think that is something that we need to be, as citizens in this region, I think we need to be concerned about. What that would look like is cutting that piece out and working directly just with local government, for example.
There is very clearly a sense of frustration from some local government that they fund it and they think everyone else is a freeloader, kind of forgetting who pays the rates that ultimately find their way back into the pool. But if, as part of this review, we lose that co-governance mechanism, then I think as a region we lose a lot. So if you want to push anything anyway, please push that.
Thank you for your answers.
Councillor Sears.
Thank you, Chair. I think that the conversations, bringing to light all my concerns and confusions, you talk about the review, and in fact, we haven't seen it. I have it because I'm on the board of Hawke's Bay Tourism. So we've talked about it, but this table's never seen it. I'm looking at it here. And while you can say we lose by losing what Matariki represents from those different groups, and also, we talk about who's paying, as you say, they're not freeloaders, but in actual fact, the ratepayers paying, and they have put their trust in their elected tables to have oversight of where the money is spent, and we simply don't. We can't. The entity is too large, the reporting mechanisms are inadequate to not even understand or know that there's a review process going on, or to understand the terms of reference. I looked at it at Hawke's Bay Tourism Board, there's 6. We've now employed 6 independent consultants to review the structure of the new structure. We've also, in another paper, we've seen Matariki's directed reader to put some of its funds back to Matariki to fund its strategic advisor, to fund its office, to fund its setup. again, taking money from the organisation we've funded to do the work back to the structure that you're telling me is good and has good representation, but now needs to be funded by ratepayer money to be able to be effective, while also being too big to be able to report back to us adequately. So we just can't hear back from our representative effectively at this table on what's happening through Matariki, all these structures. I don't know why, but I certainly don't feel like we have. So I feel your frustration as well, along with Hawke's Bay Tourism's. They sit in the same place for me, and it's not really a question, it's really just a frustration again of seeing when my ratepayer asks me, my job, it gets really complicated. My only job is to represent my ratepayers' view to the organisation. I'm not here to represent the organisation to my ratepayers. I can't represent this. I can't represent this 1.5 million or however many million we're putting in to them, because we simply don't have a structure in which we can do that. So I'm as frustrated as you.
Yeah. Through the chair, can I respond to that? I don't see how it should be different from we're a council organisation, we're not a CCO. I don't understand why the reporting is so difficult. This is not disrespect to you, but I'm puzzled about it, absolutely puzzled about it, because in my mind, we have a letter of expectation that everyone, let's say we're in a good rhythm in a couple of years' time, everyone at this table contributes, like the other shareholders, into a joint letter of expectation that gets collated by the Matariki Strategic Advisor. They shoot it to Alistair. We respond with a statement of intent. We shoot it back, and we agree it at Matariki, and we report 6 monthly in the same way that any of your CCOs or organisations report to you. We come and do a verbal update like we do every 6 months. We have all that information on the website. It shouldn't be this hard, but I think and this is some of the feedback that we'll give during our interview tomorrow, is that the Matariki mechanism is not perhaps acting, the way that it's working is an obstacle to that, but it doesn't need to be. It's all just around having an internal process in each of the councils or each of the entities to be able to say, here's 5 minutes on the agenda, update from what happened at Matariki, here's a piece of business that needs to happen, any feedback. But as I said last time, we can't do that part. So we're trying to do the absolute best we can to be transparent, structured, disciplined, to not take projects off on the side that councils say to us, we want you to do, we pay for you, this is something that we want, and we say, well, we can't because we've got regional principles and we work through Matariki. But it's a really new discipline, but it's not actually that hard.
It should function as a switch connecting all the 14 and providing a feedback mechanism. At the moment, it's all input and no output, so totally understand the frustration. But I'd hate to see the baby thrown out with the bathwater.
Thank you. And quickly now, Councillor Curtin, just a couple of minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and good to see you here. You too, we had a great conversation last time, and I'll probably send you away with more to think about. Alistair, we've been doing a dance for a long 10 years or so now, you and I, about, and following on from Sophie's comments around accountability, ratepayer, and the return, the dividend return that we're getting out of this. And as an aside, I'm looking at shareholders here, and we're listed as Class C. I've read third class or cattle class. I'm not sure what to put in that, but I'm suspecting that we pay the money, and the first class passengers, they don't pay much at all, as per life, really. But where I'm interested in terms of representing ratepayers, along with Councillor Sears' view, is we're coming up for $5 million worth of ratepayer spend in the last 3 years, and this is probably the only production we've got out of that. As a ratepayer, I find that pretty appalling. And I'm also concerned at the scope of work that you've highlighted. For example, in the transport space, I would have thought our Regional Transport Committee should be able to address the issues that you've raised. I'm interested to know why you're diving into healthcare, why you're looking at the labour market. I can probably understand that. So why are you going down all these and producing, probably, it's tabletop versions of these, so on each of those topics? What is the dividend for the ratepayer, and how do you translate the work that you're doing into meaningful actual outputs? What would give us confidence that you're turning the work you're doing into something tangible that actually increases productivity?
You can go first,
Okay.
and then I'm going to take a big bet to it. So.
Sorry, bit of a snort. Thank you for your question. So on the funding front, I understand where you're sitting. I would urge you not to forget that some of that funding, $200,000 of it, was taken on a regional freight strategy that we had nothing to do with before we were even set up. And then Te Rai took up the new business hub, took up an enormous amount of funding and time and opportunity costs. It's great that we've got it there now, but it wasn't on our plan. We didn't even know about it. It was, again, something that local government gave to us and had to come out of our funds. And it means that we have to actually spend quite a lot of the funds just existing and running Te Rai, and I'm a landlord as well. So we've only been going for 14 months now. So we've set up Te Rai, we've done quite a few pieces of work, which I think I did try to cover in my update. They take time, even being able to put together the regional submission on the Polytech reforms. That's a really significant piece of work for the region. And where that leads to is that it's a piece of advocacy for our region to try to keep our own independence. Each one of these pieces of work that we're doing is, as I explained earlier, I guess, lead to they either have an advocacy function and implementation function. So actually, I'll just go back and address why health, why workforce, and so on. So if you look up the definition of economic development is defined as the rise of living standards, and all of the key economic enablers are things like housing, health, education, infrastructure, and obviously business growth. Economic development is often, I think, probably not well categorised in this region around simply just the attraction of business or business growth. So we can't have a strong economy in Hawke's Bay unless we address across the board all of those issues. So we are taking a broad view of economic development. It's not an unusual view. I mean, that's what economic development is. And so in each of the projects that we're kicking off, so I'll use the health one as an example, there's a real cost to our economy, indirect costs, but also indirect costs of poor health for Māori.
I think
So I'm just going to say they'll take...
What I'm meaning is, are we duplicating that very same, aren't you producing?
No, otherwise we wouldn't do it.
Oh.
And so Tihei Takitimu is saying to us that they need to be able to find a way to get more than 3% nationally from vote health for Māori, obviously just for our region, and they don't have the means to do that. So having a stronger economic or social investment argument to go into bat with will help their case to advocate. So all of these pieces of work that we do have a very strong focus and reason for being. They're not just reports for the sake of it. You go bat now.
Oh, no, you pretty well covered it a little more politely than I was going to do. I mean, we inherited a basket case, Neil, and we haven't been going that long, and we've had to sort out an awful lot of a mess before we could really get going. So I'm a civil engineer. We had to try and build decent foundations. And the reason for the research, again, is so that regionally we have a strong foundation for any investment case we want to look at. So there is an absolute defensible rationale for the work that we're doing.
And each piece of work has to meet the criteria that we baked into our governance charter and our operating principles.
Thank you. So that's perfect timing. And from my point of view, I think from everyone's point of view, really valuable, highly articulate presentation of your position and the challenges that you've had to squeeze the 3 years of budget and activity into 14 months, and quite a lot of it not even your arguably core business. So I just commend you for being here today and really being very informative and persuasive, and hopefully we can return a favour in some way. But at this stage, I just need a mover and a seconder for motion to receive your report. And Councillor Williams and Councillor McIntosh, would you like to speak to the motion?
Look, yeah, just to endorse everything that's been said, and I guess understanding the economy and those metrics shows you where the best interventions are in terms of addressing some of the shortfalls identified in that report around productivity, etc. The question I've got, though, and it's I didn't pose it to either Alistair or you, Lucy, is to this organisation, to Nick or to Hiniwai even, we're supposed to, as a shareholder, have had input into the letter of expectations. Did we? And what was it? Because, you know, I'm not aware of it, and I think that does raise an accountability challenge of the Matariki Group structure, which has got all the benefits you described, but I just am concerned that maybe we missed a trick there. I mean, we can't do that again. Yeah, so that's my point. For 1% of our ratepayer spends going into this. So we need to have some oversight of how that's channeled. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor McIntosh?
Yes, I think I'll just reinforce what I said before, Chair. I mean, good things happen when you increase productivity, and so I'd be very keen to see that as remain a focus.
Thank you. Right, so we have a motion. All those in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you both. Right, so we will squeeze an H-brick and then we'll have a little break for anyone who wants to have a little break after that. But we've had Mr. Druzianic and Ms. Birch and Mr. Skirman waiting very patiently. So.
H-brick will now.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Zan. Many of you will have seen or met Debbie Birches on screen, but she's here in person, so welcome Debbie.
Nice to meet you all in face to face.
So we've had obviously this is our quarterly update. We've had quite a busy 3 months, and you have a report in there in your pack, and I'll hand over to Tom to introduce the update.
Thanks, Dan. Kia ora koutou, everybody. How to tackle this? You may recall at the last corporate strategic, we said we were going to try and mix up between providing you strategic updates as opposed to detailed sort of performance updates. And I thought this is, I suppose, as your mind starts turning towards annual plans and things like that, it was as good a time as any for a strategic update. So, look, I'm going to take the paper as read, but I'm going to I am going to work through a presentation which just sort of slightly repackages the presentation, and I think it's potentially also because there may be some public interest in terms of just a reminder of a little bit of where we've come from and where we're at now. So if you'll bear with me, you won't find it on your iPads, so I thought I'd give you all a break from your iPads and you can watch the screen. So just a brief snapshot of where we've come from. And so you remember early in the trimester, this table decided that there was a need for a strategic review of investments. And then so you identified that, and we kicked off a review process, which was intersected by Cyclone Gabrielle. So it did take some time. But out of that process, you issued a new statement of expectations, you crafted a new statement of intent, and you opened up signed off on a new SIPO to effectively give us an opportunity to probably seek more returns in the managed funds. Part of that process is that HBRIC then council went through a process and appointed 2 new independent directors, which Debbie is one of the additional independent directors. Then Debbie actually led, from an HBRIC's perspective, a request for proposal for the managed funds where we effectively took multiple providers and 2 portfolios and effectively tried to consolidate them into one, and operating under the new SIPO, and so we'll give a brief update on where that process is at. And then kind of in parallel, but sort of more recently, we indicated that we'd do a review of other investment assets, and now we're talking about group investment assets, not just the ones that are sitting with an HBRIC, but the ones that are sitting on the council's balance sheet. Now that review excludes obviously the managed funds, because we've just run a process around that, and that excludes the port too, because that's a strategic asset and it sits there with some quite strong objectives around that, and so we've sort of focused on the other issues. But in relation to the port, we were very pleased when Debbie was invited to join the port board, and so both Debbie and Dan sit there as non-independent directors, and certainly advocating, and reminding that organisation of the shareholders' requirements, and so here we are today. So that's our brief run through that. Now I'm going to get. I'm just going to skip through this just in the interest of time, so you can get to your cup of tea. I'm going to ask Tracy to quickly just give you an update on where we've got to with the managed funds, because it has been a very big process, and it has something that's required very careful management. So, and I think we've sort of ended up in a good place. So, Tracy, if you're happy to speak to that.
So we looked. Obviously, we've got the we had existing funds with Jarden and with Mercer, and we were transferring all of those across to Harbour Asset Management. So we worked very closely with the Harbour team. I must say the relationship with them has been particularly good and particularly smooth on the transition. We picked up the HBRC portfolios first, and we worked with the existing managers to make sure that as each tranche was moved across, that we were never out of the market. So basically we staggered it through a couple of months to be able to make sure that we were never out of the market for any length of time more than 1 or 2 days. So we moved the HBRC portfolios first from July through to September, and then in September and October we moved the HBRIC portfolios across as well. So overall, at the end of June, we were sitting just under our capital protected value for all the group assets.
Sorry, can I grab a water?
And at the end of October, we're actually sitting above our capital protected value by, sorry, just looking at here, by 4.4 million at the end of October. We're actually above our capital protected amount, which has been a long time coming, which is very good to see. In the transition, we had 16% of the assets we actually moved direct, so that was just picked up in species and moved across. And 84% of the assets were sold down and the cash was transferred, which meant it had to hop through our bank account and onto Harbour as well. So overall, to the year-to-date September, the whole group has returned 4.32% in returns, and all the funds are actually compliant with the SIPO.
So thanks, Tracy. So that's hasn't been a small job, and again, just reiterate good working relationship with Harbour, but also I think a really constructive working relationship with Jarden and Mercer as we exited, because I think that relationship was managed pretty well through the RFP process. So just coming back to the sort of the group investment review, when we think about the groups. The components that are driving investment return, you've got these 5 buckets of investment: managed funds, the Port of Napier, obviously, a portfolio of leasehold land in Napier, a portfolio of leasehold land in Wellington, and forestry and NZUs. And like I say, we've focused on the 3 on the right there. And I think you see from the paper that our recommendation to you is that we think the forestry assets in the Napier leasehold land, for their own separate reasons, and we can come back to those a little bit later on, really probably don't form part of your core investment portfolio, and certainly in terms of the fact that they are not likely to be delivering strong investment, reliable or strong investment or predictable investment returns back to you. So that brings us down to the sort of the core of the engine room, which is clearly the managed funds, which is represent, $167 million, as Tracy says, 36% of the portfolio value, 57% of the returns, the port based on share valuation at 30 June, 272, 58% of the portfolio and 38% of the returns, and the Wellington leasehold property. And so if you translate that into numbers, you sort of see roughly $11.7 million should fall out of managed funds. We should see that growth in managed funds. 7.7 out of the port that's currently sitting in the HBRIC budget. Obviously, there's announcements forthcoming, and about just shy of $1 million coming out of the Wellington leasehold property. So that's a total of about $20 million being yielded from your core investment assets. I'm kind of leading Food East out of it. And
Can we ask questions on the way through, or do you want to do that at the end?
What would you like, Tom?
do it at the end, is that all right? Well, because you don't want to listen to me for long. So where does that the 20 million, where does it go? And this sort of comes down to your instructions to HBRIC. 12.5 was effectively the reset dividend amount, that we agreed through the process of the review. There's a requirement for capital protection of managed funds to inflation protect at 2.5%. So that represents about another $4.2 million. There was the 24-25 dividend top-up that came up through the long-term plan, which for this financial year is 2.5. You take away HBRIC's operating expenses around about $800,000. That leaves about $400,000 to fall into the income resilience fund that you wanted to establish and things like that. So you could sort of see that the 2.5 is effectively drawn from that, kind of almost simultaneously. So I suppose that indicates is that your current portfolio, delivers, on your current expectations. And so just to round out the sort of, what were the findings of our sort of review, obviously the Napier leasehold, it's a very complex transaction. The returns are uncertain. That's a lot to do with the timing of freeholding from lessees. And it requires some more sophisticated modelling, which we're working with the HBRC team to sort of get a much better handle on that. The Wellington leasehold directors actually, HBRIC directors visited those properties recently when they were in Wellington. I think the general view is that they're high quality. It's a high quality portfolio, again, of leasehold land, but returns are low. And that, we probably suggest that HBRC considers, recycling capital to align with its more higher return investment objectives. But this will require patience. It's this nature of these properties is that they don't sell that quickly or easily. And clearly the market conditions, not great timing. And in terms of the forestry, again, it's in the report, the tree crop, is predominantly held for non-financial objectives. There's maybe a few properties that HBRC may consider whether they're actually required and whether that could be something part of a consolidation around the portfolio, but that's really in the hands of HBRC. And again, covered in the paper, we think there are opportunities around your NZUs, which are probably worth a discussion. So that's kind of a quick run through the report, and so we're happy to take any questions. But also, before I do, any additional comments from, we've got two directors at the back. Or just happy to take questions.
Yeah, I think big picture wise, the economists are all saying interest rates are sort of looking like the OCR will track down towards 3% by the end of next year. So generally when interest rates go down, assets go up. So that's appears quite positive at a big picture level for the next 12 months. And also, I think around the Wellington properties, obviously Wellington's going through a really rough period with commercial property down there. But they are blue chip properties, and it's just a matter of timing if we want to recommend divesting those properties. It's just a matter of picking the right time and getting a process going. Just conscious of not wanting to leave money on the table by, getting the timing wrong on any of this stuff.
Thank you, Dan. Look, unless our council of directors, Nature want to make any comments at this stage, we'll just go to questions. And welcome, Peter. Peter Eden on screen.
I just had a question in regards to the managed funds down 4.2%, and that is, if you compare that with other investments in managed funds, is that low, or is that a conservative figure at 4.2?
So the 4.2 is for the 4 months.
Yeah.
So annualised, it's probably, probably defer to you, but I think it's...
It is in double digits on an annualised basis, but it's very hard to predict what the next 6 months are going to look like. At the moment, it's looking pretty positive, but we think it's a pretty good return. Remember, we've been in transition, so it's quite hard to benchmark it. We need a bit more time before we can say that, the fund manager is performing better than market. It's sort of early days yet. Sorry, I can't be clearer, but it's a bit unfair to sort of benchmark. It would probably look quite good, but that may not be any indicator of future performance. Does that answer your question?
Not really, but I suppose in time, like you say, we're going to benchmark it in 6-12 months' time, and it'll give you a better indication on your return in that managed funds area. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I think Peter, these funds are set up for long-term returns. The risks, the risk profile of these funds are set up for long-term average returns of 7 or 8%. So they've only been in this new provider for 4 months, and they're well ahead. They're certainly well ahead on that short period. But obviously, it's a long-term average. There will be ups and downs along the way.
And some of that gain will be as a result of the fact that we sold things at a reasonably high market, so we're actually able to realise our gains rather than having them as unrealised. So that's certainly helped the balance sheet as well and helped those returns. So no matter what the market does, we've actually been able to capture some of that cash already.
Yeah, so what Tracy's saying is that the returns could be a bit skewed because we've realised gains on the way through. We really need to wait until we've had a full 12 months to benchmark properly. Otherwise, it's kind of could be misleading. But we're quite positive because it's been quite a good start. 4% for 4 months. Yeah, I mean, that's 12% per annum, right? So, we're aiming for 8. So, feeling quite good about it at the moment.
Okay, thanks.
Debbie's right. So we've got time for some focus questions. I have Councillor Williams, then McIntosh, then Sears.
Great to meet you effectively, Debbie and Tracy. I haven't before. Napier leasehold property, to what extent is, I'll use the word, that asset fungible? Can you sell it and replace it with another asset? Or is it locked up somehow? Are you working that through?
Yeah, it's locked up.
Given the ACC agreement.
Yeah. But you say it's...
You put a cross over it, so what does that mean?
Well, I put a cross over it because it's not really... We can't confidently tell you what your return of that investment is because
so it's not saying it's...
complexity of the nature. There is an assumption in the ACC deal that all the property, through the lifetime of the deal, which is 50 years, that all those leasehold properties will probably be freeholded. And so the formula will work to distribute those proceeds. And so that's what the modelling needs to do. So
every time that happens, we've got to compensate ACC for the lost income sort of thing, don't we?
Yeah, Chris has got some people do some lot of work on this.
We're going through all of the, working through it to see what that, through various scenarios of freeholding some of the properties will happen over the years, but the indications are there's not a huge amount of extra income coming out of there. Realistically, what you're looking at is that the cash that we got at the time point that we sold is the benefit out of that thing and what we've done with it since then.
20 million. Okay, so But so in essence, it's not a situation of, hey, we're looking for a higher performing asset for that. It's just kind of an albatross in a way that we've got to live with.
Yeah, well, let's build the financial model and I'll tell you whether it's an albatross or a tui. So,
For a what?
or a tui.
I like tuis. Bird of the year. Thank you.
Councillor McIntosh.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just ask a couple of quick questions and then a bigger one at the end?
Two really, really quick ones or one slightly.
The port return you had there, was that dividend return or was that dividend and share price movement return?
Dividend.
Just dividend, okay. So it's actually a fair bit south of that if you take into account share price movement. Wellington leasehold property, that was also just yield?
900,000.
Yeah, so that also is not, conversely, that's not value appreciation over the time they've been held. No, okay, so so the actual situation of those two is a bit different.
Yeah.
The bigger question I had was that we've got, market capitalisation wise, we're quite big, and at the moment our returns are quite low, and so I'm really interested to, and in the last, you put up that chart, thank you, and that sort of helped me quite a bit in terms of what's happened over the last couple of years since we've been around. But, effectively to increase the income, we've made the change to managed funds and, immediately you get a shot in the arm from that. And so I'm very anxious to know how quickly you say to us, for your portfolio, this is what we reckon you need to do to get your returns to an acceptable level. I'm keen to know what the timing of that is.
So it's definitely, I think the next phase is to workshop that, quite deeply, quite intently. But I suppose what we're saying that on the current pathway, given the instructions we have and the mandate we have, the pathway forward is to optimise this portfolio as it currently is. I think if you were asking a broader question as, what should the portfolio comprise, then I think that's probably something worth sitting around and workshopping through.
It goes to risk appetite, actually. How much, risk and return. So we've got some aspects of the portfolio are low risk, low return. So I think that's the bigger question.
Yeah, I think from a prudential perspective, we're quite risky too. We've got a lot of eggs in one basket. That's all to me, Chair.
Point well made. Thank you. Councillor Sears.
Thanks, Chair. Actually, I'll probably leave it because I realise now the 3rd of December is when we have 2 hours in workshop time for kind of more discussion. But I did want to say welcome and have you in the chamber's really lovely. And I was hoping to hear a bit more from you, and it's the first time we've seen you. But I think probably in that workshop time
you'll hear more from me then, more detail.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sears. And one quick question from Laura. Welcome, Laura, again.
Kia ora koutou. Am I able to see the previous slide, please? I'm just interested in the forestry. I know it's a low asset return. I'd wonder, are you going to repurpose, are you suggesting to repurpose the land use?
No, I think that's probably more a question for HBRC, but no, I don't think it's art. Are you going to repurpose the land use for the forest?
I don't think there's any, it hasn't come to council for any decision on that at the moment. I think this is just highlighting that the returns are relatively poor, or limited, maybe I should say. And they're held it's held for a number of reasons. So some of that land has been bought in the past for things like wastewater treatment plant disposal systems, and so rather than as an investment. And then there's a question around the carbon credits that are associated with that forestry.
Okay, thank you. I'll bring it up there.
I think that's been some pretty good questioning and a great summary. Was there anything else you wanted to deliver us today? We know we are seeing you again on the 3rd. So, okay, if there's no more, I will look for a mover and a seconder to receive and note the report. Councillor Sears and Councillor Roadley, thank you. Would you like to speak to the motion?
Looking forward to the workshop. Yes. Great.
Thank you. All right, so all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you, three.
Great, thank you.
See you again soon.
Chair, what would happen if we were ever to vote against receiving a report?
Yes, Chair.
Really good question.
Yeah.
I might try and see.
Well, we'd ask our staff, we'd ask our very, very talented staff for some advice about that, is what would happen.
Thank you.
Oh, yes,
Right, how are we travelling? Does anyone need a 2-minute break, or can we just keep going? I think we're all good. No? All right, no stampede for the door, let's carry on. In which case, we can go to all performance report.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll just ask Sarah to join members at the table. This is the quarterly instalment. Quarterly, that's right, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Quarterly instalment of the organisational performance report. And I'll hand over to Sarah just to do any highlights. Chris is here as well to assist, and then questions from members.
Kia ora, councillors and committee members. So this is the first quarterly report against our new long-term plan, our three-year plan. So it looks a little bit different. In this edition, I've put all of the levels of service measures in full, which has made it a little bit more lengthy. I've done this because we've got around 16 new measures that are in the long-term plan to get you a little bit more familiar with them. What I would normally do in the next few quarters is to report on them by exceptions, so it'll be a lot smaller report going forward as well. And I don't usually go before the finance report, so you get to see the summarised financial reporting that's shown by activity and groups of activity as well. If there's any more questions, Chris can probably answer those as well. Just as a points of interest, writing the executive summary, it became really clear what a very full quarter last quarter was. We had quite a lot of big milestones, and just reading staff comments, there's a lot of staff were really stretched in their resources as well. There was a lot of inquiries coming through around rates. We had our biggest ever number of Lagoimas, even following the cyclone as well. Our media inquiries spiked upwards as well. So the rates team and the customer experience team were really stretched in that time as well. And I think that comes through strongly in the report as well. So that's probably my main points of interest, but I'm happy to take any questions through the chair.
Thank you, Sarah. Do we have questions, or is it so clear? They've all been answered already. Councillor McIntosh.
I'll shut up soon, Chair.
Carry on.
On page 7, the staffing numbers, I just want to make sure I've understood that correctly. So FTEs now 308, and including 22 in the projects team?
Yeah.
So in fact, if you relate it to a year ago, we 308 less 22 staff if we're doing a comparison. Is that how that works?
I think we had some from the IPMO probably a year ago, but it was building up slowly.
Would only have been existing staff.
Yeah.
So any new recruits would have come on since then.
And just note, this is permanent staff only as well, so it's not fixed term staff, which there aren't a huge number of them as well. So that number is permanent staff only.
Okay, so some of the ones in the IPO aren't included in this number, and the project management office, I should say.
There are a handful of fixed term contracts. I think not a huge number in the organisation.
Yep. So largely, I've looked to hold the number of FTEs, or reduce it where we can, with the exception of being able to put in place the people we need to deliver the NIWI work. So that's what this is looking to demonstrate, I guess.
Sorry, can I just put it another way? Is the 308 inflated by the project management office?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, okay, Councillor Sears.
Through you, Chair. Health, safety and wellbeing. Obviously, there's been a big increase in property damage, public incidents, injury, although near misses are down, which is obviously a big indicator. I made the assumption, which I'm testing with you, that this is really about the increase in our work, we would expect to see more of these things happen as workload increases. Is that the case, or have there been?
So I haven't got Susie or Kirsty here, but that's what Kirsty provides the report to me. She's pleased with the number of reported incidents, so that number's not always indicative of increased incidents. It's just reporting of incidents as well. But there's a lot of out in the field work where a lot of these incidents happen, especially with vehicles, which most of them are. Yeah.
Yes, that was my assumption. Okay, so she didn't have any other red flags she wanted you to raise. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, just to add around property damage, there's been a spate of property damage around this part of the town. So we've had, but not just to us, but all surrounding businesses. So we've had various things like the in and out swipey security mechanisms, broken off doors, cars scratched and that kind of thing. But we haven't been alone in that process. So some of that property damage has been pretty local to here. When we reported to Risk and Audit recently, we're actually encouraging the reporting of minor incidents and near misses, and that's a positive number rather than a negative number.
Thank you. Look, at the risk of interrupting a conversation, the most exciting part of this report for me was that the Go Bay bus services had a surge in passenger numbers. So that's good news. Would you like to step up to the microphone and tell us a really good news story about that? Yeah, or is there nothing else to tell?
Really? Surprised that you're surprised.
Look at this thing.
Well, the trend has not been our friend recently.
Oh, it's all full of rhymes. Through you, Chair, absolutely. Since we've settled in mediation last year and increased bus driver wages, we have had a very stable workforce with our provider, Go Bus, which has resulted in, of course, less cancelled services, increased bus patronage, significantly increased fare revenue, which we hope to continue. So it is very good news.
Fantastic, thank you. Very well. Councillor Sears.
Well, if we're doing favourites, I just wanted to pick up on the biodiversity. The COP Biodiversity Conference just been taking place around the world. This picture that by increasing biodiversity by quite small percentages will solve all our problems. Really, it feeds into mitigation and adaptation and the flourishing of all life. And I just want to really pick that up. Deer fencing at those 10 new sites is underway and on track. That was questionable with QE2 and the catchment groups. Maintenance plan for the 25 sites with the deer fencing and goat control. So I just really wanted to congratulate the team on that. 4 new and 10 maintained. I just thought that was a great outcome. That was my pick of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Sears. Do we have any other questions on the report? No? If not, I'll grab one more quick one. This one, I think, for our Chief Executive. I'm just looking at fleet and air travel, and this has been and thinking about our carbon footprint and this kind of very deep-seated, hard-to-move carbon footprint of our fleet. I just wanted to ask whether staff were aware, and I'm sure they are, of the BYD Shark that has arrived in New Zealand, and the point that we are highly reliant on four-wheel drive, strong four-wheel drive vehicles for our teams, and so far we haven't been able to hybridise those, but this new product may present an opportunity to do that. So I just wondered whether that is an option for us.
I don't know the details of it, but absolutely, if there's an opportunity to decarbonise our fleet and the vehicle can do the right thing, then we will have a look at it. My immediate focus is on actually reducing the size of the fleet as move 1, and then what could we use as move 2.
There will come a time shortly when we can drive some carbon out of that fleet, but at the moment it's a real challenge. Thank you.
Chair, I do have a question.
Councillor Williams.
Apologies. It's probably a Chris question to do with reserves.
Chris was very worried behind me.
Yeah, well, take your pick as to which Chris answers it. But if you look at each of the expenditure pages, activity reporting by group of activity, they've got, it's a sea of red ink around the line reserves. And I'm just wondering what the implications are of that in practical terms. For example, if you look at, let's go down to asset management, had reserves at budget 517 something, and we've got instead actual 16, 1 point, So does that mean we're borrowing against what does that mean? Is that internal borrowing, or what is that?
No, so all of the places where we're saying that some of the funding for the expenditure is coming from reserves, that's money that has been put aside previously from rates for things like depreciation or stuff like that. Where we have, so the, you were looking, I've got integrated.
Page 32, for example.
So 32 with asset management.
But it's on every page, the reserves are in the red for some reason. I just wanted to understand what that means in practical terms.
There are, so where the reserves are in the red, that means that we are putting money into the reserve. So if actuals are in the red, that means that some of the funds that we're getting, we're actually putting more into the reserves this year, or up until this point in time, than we need to take out of them to fund the activity. So that's where we have actually had quite a bit of depreciation. We haven't actually needed any funding from reserves, so the money is going into the reserves. So red's good in that when we're actually having, in terms of we're building up the reserves, we haven't needed to take money out of the reserves as yet. For something like asset management there, where the budget was to have actually brought money out of the reserve to fund some of the expenditure, that is because some of the expenditure that has incurred during the year hasn't been reserve related that we have needed to fund at this point in time. I would suggest that in terms of looking at the reserves on a quarterly basis, we do most of the work. They will go up and down depending on the timing of when we set the budget at the start of the year, the amount needed from reserves is really based on the annual amount needed. It does not take into account how the expenditure will fall during the year. So you will see ups and downs in that line as we go through the year. And the most important figure of that is the year-end figure in terms of whether we've been able to actually top up the reserve or only utilise the amount from the reserve that we originally thought to for the full year.
Thank you. So for asset, we would have we budgeted to spend 517,000 from reserves. In fact, we put 1.6 million in.
Yeah.
So the word deficit in brackets is kind of the wrong way around. Thank you. I'm glad I asked. I feel much better now.
Right. Well, if there are no further questions, we can go to the motion, which is that we receive and note the organisational performance report. Do I have a mover and a seconder? And I'll put your hands up once. You've been very active today, Councillor McIntosh. Good on you. And I think Councillor Sears got her hand up too. So would you like to speak to that motion?
No.
Sears, all right. All those in favour, you say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, Sarah. And the team that sits in behind. Right, so we are on the home stretch, financial report, and this is where I get the chance to say thank you again for the significant improvements that we've seen over the last, during this trimester. I was rude and grumpy at the start about the comparative quality, but as we've got Tech One under control and things are getting better, much better. Thank you. Anyway, the floor is yours, Chris.
We accept those compliments gratefully, especially as this quarter's report has been quite trying to get together. Obviously, with the annual report and the extended time, or the time frame of doing that, going right up through into the end of October, where we finally approved the annual report, it's meant that sort of opening balances and everything for the new financial year have been moving around, and trying to finalise a quarterly report when you've got a moving opening position is always slightly difficult. I'll get Pam to go through the front part of the report. Two extra parts that we've put in for this month is one around the overall sort of cyclone initial response and recovery information, and one on the NIWI position, which Jess has joined us up the front to have a bit of a chat about. But Pam, do you want to start off?
Yeah, sure. So the overriding message in this quarterly report, through the chair, is that the highlights are the silt and debris and the recovery piece. So it's against your budget. It's giving us some real big variances at income level and expenditure level, but at a net result, we're very close to budget. There are no alarm bells in there for me. At a balance sheet level, the rates predominantly received early in the year, so we're sitting with quite a bit of cash to pay off a loan that falls due in April next year. So essentially, I don't see anything here that I want to draw your attention to, because it's sitting at a good steady level. Look, the most interesting part is definitely Jess's piece. Pass.
I'll quickly mention, as we come down, I've put in some information about Cyclone Gabriel, the initial response and recovery. We thought that because this has been it's an amount of work that's going to be over several years, already over 3 years in there, what we'll do is keep updating in terms of this table as to our total spend and where we're getting that money back from. The key message from here is we've spent 65.2 million already. This is, remembering, excluding all of our resilience, flood resilience and the NIWI that we'll talk about next. So we spent 65.2, we expect another 6.3 to come, mainly on the infrastructure stuff. Of that $71.5 million, we are expecting 53 million of that to be funded through NEMA insurance and other costs where we had charged other organisations for use of generators and things like that. We do have about 5 million that, sorry, I'm just reading my notes. We took 5.3 million out of our disaster reserves. So we had regional disaster reserves and local scheme disaster reserves that had been set up previously for exactly these situations. So they funded 5.3 million of the costs. Our underspends in general rate funded areas where people were working on cyclone related stuff, not doing our normal work, contributed another $5 million to the costs into there. And what we end up with is about $7.5 million that needed to be funded by the ratepayer. We have 3.1 million that was funded through the cyclone rate that we'd put in for last year. And at the moment, we've got expecting to have about $4.4 million worth of loans left that will be funded through the general rate. We already have that in our 3-year plan. That was the old cyclone rate that had moved up into the general rate, and that will cover off the repayment of these loans, which is our shortfall against the overall position. So that was an extra thing that we'd added in there to just give you the comfort there. And then the only other thing that we added in was around the NIWI position.
Yeah, so as you can see from the paper, there's this very high-level summary version of the project spend by category to date. That's over the life of the project and not specific to the quarter of the first quarter of this financial year. So we are still just setting up the throes of the management reporting at that level, and we haven't quite managed to get it to fully by a financial reporting accounts and periods at this point. So we are still very much working to a cost to date or across the life of the project, not necessarily aligned with the financial years as they fall just yet.
Thank you, Jess.
If you've got any questions.
Oh, go to the floor. Question, Councillor Sears.
Yes, specifically on that, Jess, item 9, paragraph 39. So if we take the first one, Wairoa, for example, you're saying that those very specific costs in there are what you expect to be the total cost across the whole life of the project, not to date. We'll see that.
That is the cost from the start of when we started these projects back in July last year, as the team started doing pre-project planning type works. Those are the costs from that date until September.
Oh, okay, so they're up to now, so there's more to come. So, I mean, it might be Chris probably that needs, I'm looking at, so for Wairoa, for example, we can look, or Whirinaki, I mean, Wairoa is already $500,000 into engineering design. We're expecting that to continue to grow. That figure is what's been spent so far just to get to. So then, on top of that, why do we see figures, 320,000 on project management, another 230 on the program setup costs, which seem to be individual for each project. It's not a program set up across the whole program. And then there's huge figures below that for program level costs allocated. I'd quite like you to unpick all of those.
I can answer that.
Or
If you want.
Oh, you can just help with
Sure.
some of the detail. But some of these numbers, I'd start off, some of these numbers look very large.
Yes.
But they actually, we've spent less than 5% of the project sum. White collar costs for infrastructure projects will run between 15 and 20%. So,
sorry, say that again, Chris.
I said white collar costs for infrastructure run between 15 and 20%. So,
Can you explain what you call white cost?
so
white
that's
collar or
design, that's the non-direct cost of the contractor's effort. So all of these works, and we would take Wairoa as a case in point, because some people might say, well, you spent 1.7 million, that's an eye-watering amount, what have you actually achieved? So we've been running effectively an engagement process with the community and representatives of the community for well over a year. That started off with engaging with the community to harvest community ideas, which resulted in 18 options. All of those 18 options have been worked through at various levels, and those options have been presented back to the stakeholder group, and then last week back to the community. In addition, we've run technical pieces of work looking at river mouth optimisation, answering questions to the community like, if only opened your river mouth, there would never be a flood. If you deal with the sediment, then there won't be a flood. If you dredge the river, everything will be okay. And so again, a whole lot of technical work has been undertaken. So the point is, it's very wide ranging. 18 options plus another 3 or 4 sort of technical investigations, regular engagements with the stakeholder group. And so project management costs are the people organising all these activities. So we've got a dedicated project manager now for Wairoa. So basically, 30, 40 hours a week dedicated to Wairoa and working with the Crown manager. So some of the establishment costs was setting up the program. So we put basically a business case forward to develop an IPMO from scratch, and we needed to develop all of the structures, procedures, and other information to get the thing up and running. So a lot of those are setup costs. We've got dedicated accommodation for the IPMO, and so Jess might be able to go into the program level costs, but there'll be a bunch of fixed costs probably that have been allocated across the program based on the estimate, so prorated across the program. So we've got physical costs of everything that contributes to these infrastructure projects, ranges from the accommodation, project managers organising. The governance costs have been absolutely massive, so we've had to develop really detailed bespoke reporting, which you've all seen, that has a wide range of audiences and is probably some of the most detailed governance reporting I've ever seen for infrastructure. And so all this takes effort, and it's all effectively costed in a prorated way to the various projects, because A, we have no other way of funding it, and B, it demonstrates the actual cost of all of the activities required to deliver that infrastructure.
So Jess, just can you clarify, it's prorated as to the value of the project?
Yes, currently it's prorated to the total project value being the 70 million in that case for
whatever.
Whitehall.
And can you just clarify what Chris said around program setup costs versus the program level costs allocated?
Yeah,
What would we see as the difference?
So the program setup costs are mostly around the consultants that we've had come in to help set up certain processes, advice on document management systems and that sort of thing. Along with there are some actual office fit out costs sitting in that line item as well. Program level costs allocated is mostly made up of program level staff that work across the whole NIWI program and then apportioned out accordingly. Trying to timesheet that when you're working on pieces of work that go across, that's tricky to manage, so we've done it in an apportioned way instead.
Makes sense. Can I just keep going? On the Havelock North project, we've invested some money there in terms of design, some consultation, land acquisition and project management, so there's 200,000 roundabout there. Havelock, Hastings District Council's delivering that work, so will that will fall into the rating project. So this is just for us to see line of sight, but that's not actually an HBRC cost?
Yes, that's correct.
It's correct, okay. So it's just so we can see where the finance is falling. Okay, thank you, appreciate that.
That's good.
Mr Chair. Can I go to your rate collection, paragraph 24, 25, etc. I just want to understand, Chris, I guess you'll be able to answer these questions. You're experiencing a high volume of inquiry around remissions, and you've got 140 hardship remissions to date. What's been the usual number in previous years? Is that a high number of actual remissions?
Yes, it's absolutely.
That's remissions received. I'm assuming they're approved or...
For all the remissions, we have reviewed all of the public transport ones. The hardship ones, we are going through the process and reviewing at the moment. So at the point of this report, we hadn't reviewed any of them. We have now reviewed about 30 or 40 of them.
Sure.
What it's looking like at the moment is the amount of remissions that have come in or the applications that have come in and the level that we are approving, we will be quite below our total remissions budget that we had put in for the current year by several $100,000 into there. In terms of previous years, it is other than the previous year where we had the same remissions. Prior to that, we would have received very little in the way of hardship type remissions.
So the 140 hardship remissions do not include the transport remissions, is that right?
No, so did we have the total? The total of the 90,000 of the public transport remissions was, I think, from memory, about 170, 180 remissions. I may be a little bit wrong on that number.
Just to delve a little bit into the hardship remissions, when you remit the transport component, that is debited against the transport budget. Is that how that works?
No, we have a remissions budget that sits centrally with the rates team.
Sure. So it's a separate line item.
Yes.
Now, when a hardship remission is made, is that against the general rate, or where is it applied, the debit?
It's on the same remissions line which is applied against the general rate. So as part of the planning process and the budget setting process, we set $1 million for the remissions budget. We actually, which is set against the general rate.
Yes.
We funded that by asking HBREC to provide an additional.
So there's no sense of any other apportionment against, for example, a targeted rate.
No.
And that only applies to the transport.
No. So all area where a rate is it becomes too difficult to try and remit back to an individual's every targeted rate that they're with, and that is why remissions are always just done back to the general rate, so it's part of the general rate cost.
And in terms of the remissions include the science charges, are there any remissions of science charges?
No, the remissions don't include science charges, so that is a completely separate process, and we've only had one application for a reduction in a science charge.
Okay. And just to clarify that, and I always get confused about this, is that an arrears that is relating to the previous year's invoice for the science charge, or is it in fact in the current year that it applies to?
Science charges are issued for the 10 months previous and the next 2 months. So they're issued in around about May for the year that finishes that June.
Okay. Final question is, how much of is it going to cost in terms of the remission of science, other science charge? What is the remission? How much?
How much for remission of science charges? It's just one individual that we have remitted previously.
And what's the value of that?
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head. I think for the current year, I can't remember the exact number.
Come back to you.
Come back.
On that one.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have councillor Sears and Rodley.
Back again. Chris, so when we talk about the engineering design, some of these figures, for example, Waiheke, which of course we're starting on, 132,000. So that's the completed engineering design work figure, or this isn't only the design?
So in terms of Waiheke, there's the works beginning and not the main works. The works are the enabling works, so it's around stockpiling. So when we say we're beginning and we've had a press release saying that works on the ground have started, they are the enabling works. We're still working through finalising the design, and it's all about optimising that for the secondary effects. And so there's further design work to do, and we still need to go through the consenting process. So there's been some sort of value engineering done at optimising the height, because of course it's all about impact on your neighbours, and then having to navigate the consenting process so that we're not creating effects for other people. And so that's the current activity that's occurring.
So when we have engineering work, that all those lines there, none of those are final figures for engineering work, all our engineering work still in.
That's correct.
Process.
We haven't got final designs
For
ready
any
for
projects
construction on any of those projects.
The scheme review line,
Yep.
the 1.1 million, was that our Tonkin and Taylor review of Hiratonga?
So that would be Hiratonga plus Upper Tukituki plus some other work on small schemes that has commenced.
Last question, promise, Chair. Jess, the figures around project management or set-up costs, are any of those figures corporate overheads from this organisation, or do all costs sit in their own separate line within the NIWI team or within the IMPO?
So all dedicated staff of the PMO do come into these program level costs, but for instance, John and Chris and Nick's involvement, that's all part of corporate overheads and funded through their budget items.
So again, you're just tracking those as somehow?
We can't track their time necessarily to the PMO of that. So that's why it's just that dedicated PMO staff costs coming into here. The rest actually aren't claimable under the funding arrangement.
Aren't claimable. Okay, that's really useful. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go Councillor Rodley, then we're going to go into Laura on screen, and then Councillor Foley. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Chris Dolly. Just to clarify, you said the fantastic work that's been done with the stakeholder group and the community consultation around there, that sits as the 133 second item there.
She's talking about Wairoa.
So,
Sorry,
yep.
Dolly, in case you didn't know.
Yep, so that would be a public
I thought that was a given.
Yep.
Apologies, Chris. But the project management, the 321, that's the organisation of that group. that right? So the 133 is direct costs and the 321 is the people running the
So-
cutter on that, is that?
So
what you
that's
mean?
right. So project management would typically be the project manager and any assistant project managers that we may have. So we've got project coordinators. So that is the organising of all aspects. So everything there, we have to organise designers, any investigations, any consultants, any engagement. All of that organising is organised by someone who's generally the project manager. And we've also got the comms and engagement teams. I'm not sure where they come in terms of, so they'd come in at program level, so they're distributed pro rata across the program. So that's, yeah, the project manager is the overall coordinator of all the activities you see there. Hopefully that answers your question.
There's obviously some design, or some of the work from the professional services, like the design engineers, are also coming along to some of those public and iwi consultations as well. So some of those costs actually land in the professional services fees as well.
I imagine working it out is tricky. So when it's the project manager is the likes of, say, Phil, he's already a staff member here. Does he sit in here, or does that sit as corporate overhead?
So the way that PMO is structured, and the way our capital delivery is structured is everyone working on the capital delivery charges to the capital delivery. And that's been a consistent position of this council. So it's not like we have a staff member who is funded for capital delivery separately. If we were to do that, we would undervalue our capital assets because it takes a project manager and a team of professionals to go through the prelims to works and then deliver a piece of infrastructure. So the capital cost of that infrastructure is not the contract value, it's all of the effort required to actually deliver that asset. And so quite rightly, all of those costs are funded by the asset and so funded through the NIWI contract.
That was the question. And second question, if I may. Other Chris, you spoke about the level of remissions that we've got under hardship, that they're going to come in considerably under the allocation that we'd put aside of the $1 million that we had requested and received out of HBRIC. What happens to the difference there? Does that become, we've pulled down $1 million, we might spend less than that. What happens to that bit?
What we will need to do is, once we have actually got the full level of the remissions coming in and when they're drying up, is then assess as to where we are sitting at that point in time and figure out if that is a reduction in the amount of the dividend that we need back, the special dividend from HBRIC, given that was just purely to fund those remissions.
So we're able to do that, adjust that amount we need?
I think that we should be able to. That would be something that we would bring back in a finance report to council.
Thank you.
And just on the public transport, we've had 786 remissions that were processed. It was a little bit light.
Well done.
Thank you. Laura, go to you.
Kia ora, thank you for your report. I'm just looking at the paragraph 39. Are we able to separate public and iwi consult, and can we be specific around the statutory partners in the iwi consult? I'm saying this from a perspective of TPW, that we've got 4 sites in this consultation and we don't know what's going on given the amount of work that's been spent on professional services as well. Are we able to just separate it just so that we know what's going on? Because public, iwi and your statutory partners are very different people. Thank you.
That's right. So I think it's a question for the committee in terms of the structure of the regular reporting. We can certainly provide that detail. I can ask if we can provide that detail, Jess, out of session. So it's leave that with the chair.
It's a reasonable question to ask, but if staff could have a look at that and find out what's involved and whether, because I presume you haven't been coding that way so far. So perhaps if you could just report back as to what's involved in doing that, but it's a reasonable question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, Councillor Foley. So I have one. So we'll just crack into that one. I'm just about finished. So just want to talk about rates collection 24-25. So to my way of thinking, in a perfect world, we wouldn't be charging rates penalties because everyone would get in on time, and we wouldn't need to be giving remissions. And so in an imperfect world, the higher either of those figures are suggests the worse off we're doing in terms of the way that we administer our rates billing. So it's good news that we're actually probably, it sounds like we're going to come under some of our remissions, because that means we're not perhaps as bad in our, we haven't as offended as many people as possibly we thought we had, possibly. But I'm looking for ideas to make this better. Now, I'm broadly conscious that I used to pay my rates bills in January, and now I pay them in September, which is great for the organisation from a cash flow point of view, but bad for my cash flow. In this environment where everything seems to be going up and our rates go up quite strongly, the ability to budget cash flow for rates is much more important. So I got quite excited the other day when I saw some reference to the direct debit option for paying rates, and I thought, is that something that we have been underselling as an option?
Yes, it is.
And if so, what can we do better? I got quite excited that might be a benefit, not only just a budgeting benefit to ratepayers, but actually a cash flow benefit. But I've been reliably informed by Chris offline that in fact everyone has to be up to date. So there's no ability currently to use the system opting into direct debits to defer, which is, and I accept that that's the current case, but it seems that what we've been doing is asking for more earlier, and that's getting more challenging every year for some people. I wanted to ask if, through the CE, if it would be possible for us to look at our policy around direct debiting and whether we can be a bit more generous and lenient with the way that we administer, that we accept direct debit, such that we can, and it may be that we're possibly giving away a bit of cash flow advantage in that, but if we can make it easier for more people, the more challenging our rates bills become, we're going to have happier ratepayers. So just, it's to our benefit that we collect regularly and confidently through that system. Can I leave it to staff to think creatively about opportunities?
Yeah, I think we can have a think about that. I think it has been thought about a number of times, and especially when they did change the due date of the rates, which was unfortunately before my time, but we can have a look into the discussions and everything that was held around that time into there. We do try to encourage people to go on to direct debits because we do have it fortnightly, monthly, to align with your pay, anything else in there. Yes, there is a one-off time where if you have been just paying annually on the due date for that first year, you will need to pay off that year's one or pay it as a lump sum and then start your direct debit as effectively setting yourself up in a jam jar with your money to pay the rates bill when it comes out at the end of at the start of the next financial year, and so it's paid off by the due date. So there's a one-off year where you do end up paying a little bit more in that 12-month period, but then if you're on a direct debit, then you are just paying your monthly or fortnightly payments, and very easy to budget that way.
And I guess what I'm doing is actually questioning whether we couldn't be a bit more flexible to reduce that barrier because those people who find it most difficult to pay our bills are those who are least likely to be able to fund, to go most of a year in advance. So we're benefiting from the cash flow, and the current policy benefits us more than it did before we changed the policy and the timing. So that's my point, is that we could choose to make it easier for people.
And we do with payment plans. So if anyone is struggling with their, ring up the rates team and they will talk to you about having a payment plan, which involves putting a penalty block on so you're not charged penalties and you do end up paying that off over that period. They do try to encourage you to be able to get onto a direct debit in the future so that you're paying off the rates before the due date, but we will take that away and have another look at it and bring something back.
Thank you. If there are no other questions. I'm sorry, Councillor Ormsby, you did ask me earlier. Apologies.
That's all right, no worries. Thank you, Chair. Team, I just want to understand more around the rapid repair level of service upgrade that comes in at 121,000 and it is tagged as other. Can you just talk about what that work is?
So generally, I can talk about it, the specifics of that 121. I have to defer to Jess, and she may not know because it's one number out of many thousands. So the rapid repair, we're currently assessing what are the location where rapid repair should occur. So rapid repair is, of course, where we made an initial repair to our stop bank network, and we may need to upgrade that because of the post-Gabriel statistics effectively. So the team are working on that now and coming up with a system of ranked locations that we would then work through some high-level estimates to apportion that funding. And so, for example, Waipawa is an example where we would be investing in some additional work to the work already done in Waipawa. So the reason we haven't got a lot of expenditure there is the team is working through that. And then we'll progressively prioritise and work through those locations. I think the mouth of the Turakuri is another area which would probably be a high priority, and there'll be a number of other locations. So when we finish that work, it's probably a good opportunity for us to share where those locations are and what the prioritised list is. It could be possible that there's insufficient funds to cover all of the work. And so we'll bring those issues to you when we're aware of them.
Thank you. And just secondly, it's more of a suggestion because it's great to have these figures come to us at Corporate and Strategic, but often they don't tell you where in the project, Wairoa is, Whirinaki is, and so a descriptor on how far each has progressed would be really useful to understand the dollars spent on each project. So you'll probably take some of the NIWE reporting you do for us anyway, but overlay that on what is actually being spent.
Yeah, so that will come through in our EICC report in more detail. So.
Okay, thank you.
Move that report be received.
Thank you. So we've got a mover, a seconder. Do we have a seconder? Councillor McIntosh. So all those in favour of receiving the report?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. That is our last item. So I'm going to, in the spirit of springing things on people at the last possible moment, Councillor Sears, with your impeccable pronunciation, and it is really good, your te ao Māori, te reo Māori, could you lead us in a closing karakia, please?
I don't feel very confident with this new one.
Yeah, I will give you a hand.
Maybe our chair could, our regional council chair could.
Or maybe, well.
Can you share it between?
Or maybe who started the karakia?
Okay, we'll go back to Councillor Williams.
We do the one on here on the sheet?
Yes, please.
All right.
We don't have it. Thank you. Do you not?
Does anyone else
that
need it that hasn't got it? Because I'm going to need it.
Okay.
Yes, I'm going to do the standard kia tau. So, all right. You good?
Yep.
Kia tau ngā manaakitanga a Tanea Ngāro, ki runga ki tēnā o tātou. Kia mahia te hua mā kihikihi, kia toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te aroha, toi te reo Māori, kia turuturu ka whakamuawa, kia tīna, hui e, tai.
Thank you.